Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Hey, Chris, what's going on?
Hey, John, good morning. Thanks for having me on. I'm a big fan of what you're doing. Let's go, man. Let's bring it on. What do you want to know?
Of course, appreciate it so much. And I definitely want to know a lot about all the amazing things you've been up to. And obviously, the first thing that stood out to me when I saw your entire body of work was that you started at Fordham Prep here in New York, one of our rival schools at Xavier High School, both the two maybe biggest Jesuit schools in the city. I'm curious whether it's from there or at Marquette, where you were there for a few years. What kind of propelled you into this whole career in the writing space?
What happened was I got a job at the Associated Press shortly after leaving Marquette and graduating with a journalism degree, and I found I had a knack for it. I had worked for the Milwaukee Brewers as an intern during college, and then I started at the AP doing baseball box scores, and I kind of thought that I was going to eventually work for a baseball team in marketing because that was sort of my passion. But at the AP, they let you write a little bit because they want to know what they got, and a couple of older guys said, hey, you kind of got a knack for this, both reporting and writing. And so they kept giving me chances and I kept kind of hitting the ball hard. And one thing led to another. And I became a baseball writer after about 4 years, including a city side reporter, just covering straight news. And then all of a sudden an opportunity opened up where the basketball writer moved into management and they needed a basketball writer. And they said, you want to cover the NBA, and I was 30 years old. And I said, well, I really like being a baseball writer. I had been doing it for 7 years. But I said, I'm not going to turn down an opportunity to cover the NBA. So I took the job and I was the NBA writer at the Associated Press for 10 years. It's really, John, it's a lot of it is timing and a lot of it is figuring out what you're good at while you're in your 20s. Young people have a lot of expectations put on them sometimes in high school and in college. You have to know right now what you plan to do with your life. But that doesn't really work for everybody. Unless you're going to be like an engineer or a lawyer and you got to go to pre-law or a doctor and you're going to go to pre-med, you may not have it figured out when you're in high school, much less when you're in college. But oftentimes over the course of your 20s, you sort of settle into something and figure out, hey, I'm good at this and I like it. And then that becomes your career.
Course, and I find that fascinating because we would think for most people, everyone would kind of just assume that it was always from the beginning, but you were obviously mostly a baseball guy, and then now you have this incredible career in obviously basketball. So it's crazy to think as to how, like you said, timing and all that stuff obviously plays a huge role into it. With the Associated Press, obviously you did a lot covering the league. Did that transition a little bit into the international game? Were you mostly doing NBA games? How did that work?
Well, I started doing NBA games, and I was nervous as hell on my first couple games. But I was working with a veteran named Bill Bernard, who, was very good at just saying, "Hey, man, chill out. The game is going to proceed as it's going to proceed, and a lot of different things happen in a basketball game. Your job is to kind of winnow it down and figure out what distinguished this game from every other game. And there'll be a defining moment in this game and you'll know it when you see it, but it's probably not going to be in the first quarter or the second quarter. It's 80% of the time it's in the fourth quarter and sometimes it's in overtime. So just sit back, watch the game and watch for the defining moment and then write it fast, because at the Associated Press, you're pretty much expected to file as close to after the final buzzer as you can. As the lead Associated Press basketball writer, you cover a lot of playoff games. The Knicks were very good. The Bulls were very good when I was young. So I, covered the Bulls-Knicks rivalry very closely because back then the scorer's table was also the press table. So I had the AP seat, which was right next to the visiting bench. You could actually look into the every visiting team's huddle and see how every team, every coach kind of led his team. So I got a real up close view. You could smell the game down there. You could smell the sweat on the players and you could hear what the referees are saying to the scorers table and what they're saying to the coaches. So, I always tried to bring some of that into my writing because sitting that close, you see and hear things that are not apparent to the viewer on TV. And that was always the trick for me. What can I bring to the reader or the viewer when I moved on to ESPN that they didn't get on TV? What was going on behind the scenes? And that's sort of where I distinguish myself as a writer and a broadcaster, being able to tell people things that they didn't see on TV. Now, as far as the international stuff goes, the Associated Press sends an enormous staff to every single Olympics. And so I went, my first one was Atlanta in 1996. Little side story, they played China one night, and I was the new guy, and they were messing with my copy a lot. And that was, I think, the third game. So I would file at the buzzer, but the stuff wasn't coming back for like 45 minutes. And everybody was like, why is it taking so long? Why is it taking so long? And there were a lot of editors doing a lot of rewriting, and because I was kind of an unknown commodity. It was very frustrating to me because I was doing my job and the stuff was coming back slowly. So they played China one night, and I was just shaking my head afterwards because it had happened again. And I had to walk back to my hotel, and the most direct route is right through Olympic Park. But I'm like, I don't want to be around the crowds. I just want to kind of take the long way. So I went in a circuitous route around the park right when the bomb went off. And so if I'd gone through the park, like I would have been in the middle of the park right when the bomb went off. And so, you never know what twist of fate happens. But then I spent the rest of that night at Grady Hospital, which is the big trauma center hospital in Atlanta, because my straight news training had told me when something like that happens, the stories are to be found where they're bringing the victims. So you go to the hospital. I got a lot of good interviews that night with families of victims because that's where everybody was going. A lot of reporters flocked to the park, but the cops sort of sealed that off. But I was able to pull a bunch of good stories out of Grady Hospital because that's where the action was and that's where the stories were available to be told. But basically, I did the Atlanta Olympics, I did the Sydney Olympics, the Athens Olympics, the Beijing Olympics. And what's neat about that is when you're covering Team USA and you're in the United States, they always have training camp in Vegas. You're covering the best players in the NBA. These are the dream teams. And you don't really stand out because there's 150, 200 reporters there. Then all of a sudden you go overseas, and again, there's 150, 200 reporters there, but you're the only American. And so the players recognize you like, hey, wait, we know him. He's been with us the whole way. And so that allows you to get to know some of the best players in the league because let's face it, they're overseas. There's not a whole lot to do after practice and between games. And so there's a lot of shooting around, foul shooting contests, horse games, and the teams tend to stick around the gym after practice. And so you can talk to pretty much anybody you want to. A good example was in Beijing. This never happened, but this happened actually once. The team really had nothing to do. And when practice ended, there was 50 reporters surrounding Kobe Bryant, most of them Chinese reporters, but because it's open to media from all around the world, there were Aussies there, Brits there, you name it. And Kobe took everybody's questions, and he just kept sitting there and taking questions. And I was one of the last guys that went over to him, and I'm like, well, Kobe Bryant's available. I can get him now. And I asked him about 4 or 5 questions, and I was the last guy there. And I literally ran out of questions. And Kobe Bryant was just sitting there, and he would have taken 10 more, but there was nothing left to ask, and no one left to ask questions. So that was the day that Kobe Bryant was available to the media, probably more than any time in his entire career, and it was at the American University in Beijing. So again, that's a kind of a long way of saying being boots on the ground overseas with Team USA allows you to get to know the best players in the league. And obviously when you come back and are covering the NBA, that rapport that you've developed with these guys overseas, they remember you when they see it in the locker room, at the Garden or at the Barclays Center or back at the Meadowlands. And you're able to use that sort of familiarity that you have to get even better stories going down the road.
What stuck out to me tremendously was that I looked up that game against China. And what stuck out to me before you mentioned the bombing was that the U.S. won by 60 points, things like that. And then it's funny how the thing that stuck out to you about that has nothing to do with basketball. But that was obviously such a standout moment in that entire Olympics.
Yeah, the only game that was close in that Olympics was the gold medal game against Yugoslavia, which was tight in the first half. At halftime, I want to say it was about a 4 or 5 point game. And remember, in 1992, the original Dream Team in Barcelona, nobody came, anywhere near them. And one of their prelim games, they beat Cuba by 79. So the gold medal game against Yugoslavia, Vlade Divac was playing. And it was like a big deal at halftime that the game was close. And then the team turned on the afterburners in the second half and won the gold medal. And man, were they out of there quick, because the Atlanta Olympics did not go off as planned. And when that thing ended, man, like Karl Malone said it best, I'm going to get on the first thing smoking as soon as I get my gold medal. And that was an afternoon game, and he was I don't know if he went back to Louisiana or if he went back to Salt Lake, but he was gone that evening. And a lot of the other Team USA players felt the same way, because the Atlanta Olympics was, one debacle after another. A lot of them had to do with transportation issues. Then there was the bombing, and it just wasn't a happy Olympics. There were better ones.
For sure, I can imagine. And when you mention the differences you've seen in multiple Olympics, whether it's obviously the Dream Team winning by a lot, and then you've seen so many since then. From all the teams that you've seen, which one do you think really sticks out to you that you would call the best one out of all of them?
The best one, that's a good question. I think the 08 team in Beijing played a great gold medal game against a very good Spanish national team. Ricky Rubio was actually on that team, and he was like 18 years old. He didn't play a lot. Calderon was the starting point guard. But that game was tight, and that game went all the way down to the last couple possessions, and Kobe took it over and hit a couple really big shots. And, that was the redeemed team, because that was 4 years after Team USA had gone into Greece and lost 3 times, including the opener. One of the most shocking games I've ever covered. They played Puerto Rico in the opening game, and they lost by 19. And Larry Brown coached that team. LeBron and Dwayne and Carmelo and Amari Stoudemire were all on that team, but Larry didn't use them much. The USA Basketball put them on the roster just so they could kind of see what it's like to march at an opening ceremony and be overseas and experience some stuff internationally. That team stopped in Turkey on the way to Athens. Every time LeBron came into the game, because he came off the bench, he played behind Richard Jefferson at small forward. And every time he came into the game, good things happened. And then Larry would yank him. Richard started every single game in that Olympics except for one. And for the life of me, I can't remember exactly who replaced him the one game he didn't start, but it was not LeBron James. And I think LeBron probably still holds it against Larry a little bit that he has a bronze medal somewhere in one of his sock drawers that is not a gold medal because Larry wouldn't let him start.
Obviously, you've covered so many wins, but there have been a few of those losses. And one of the other bronze medals that LeBron has is the one from 06 when they lost to Greece in the semifinal round. How much, when it comes to upsets, which one, like out of all of them, shocked you the most? Was it Puerto Rico? Was it Greece in 06? Which one really stuck out to you as, oh my God, I never thought that would happen?
Well, Puerto Rico by 19, that was an extraordinary loss because it was such a lopsided game. They were never really in that game. The Greece loss, I don't want to say I saw it coming, but that team, how best to characterize it? They didn't think there was any chance at all that they could lose. They were very, very confident to the point of being overconfident. And Greece comes out there with a team that doesn't have a single NBA player on it, but they ran their system very well. And they just pick and rolled them to death. And the Americans couldn't defend it. And all of a sudden, a 4-point game became a 20-point game in the space of like 90 seconds. It was a guy named Vasilis Spanoulis who played briefly for the Houston Rockets under Jeff Van Gundy. He was killing them. They kept going under the screens, and he kept popping behind the screen and nailing 3-pointers. And like I said, all of a sudden Greece was up 20, and the Team USA did claw back, but they had dug such a hole they couldn't kind of make it all the way back. And that was in a semifinal game. And the folks back home were shocked that this team of, all NBA All-Stars could lose to a team from Greece that had not a single NBA player on it. And Greece went on to play, I believe it was Argentina or Spain in the gold medal game. And the Americans played for the bronze. And it was a shock to the system, but then again, that spawned the Redeem team in 2008. And the Redeem team won all their games, and the winning streak that they started lasted until the World Cup in China a couple of years back. So sometimes you gotta really get kicked in the pants before you can get up, dust yourself off, and come back. And that's what happened to that version of Team USA. And I think the whole USA basketball program, it was a wake up call that, hey, we have to respect every single opponent because these guys are playing with a passion because they're representing their country that's very, very real, and they're going to bring their A game every single time. They may not have the talent, but sometimes they'll have the chemistry and the cohesion, the familiarity from playing with each other for years and years and years. The Argentina team that gave the U.S. fits a bunch of times, those guys have been playing together since they were part of the Argentinian junior team. Guys like Manu Ginobili and Luis Scola and Fabricio Roberto, they had been playing with each other for 10 years when they went to the Tournament of the Americas and gave Team USA a couple, real tough games, including a defeat. So you got to respect everybody because of the fact that you may not know these guys, but these guys know each other real well. And look, there's only one basketball, and if they're running their plays to perfection, and they get ahead of steam and they're hot that night, they can play with Team USA. Now, there's not a lot of teams that can do that, but there's probably 5 or 6 around the world that can. We've seen it from Russia, we've seen it from Greece, we've seen it from Puerto Rico, we've seen it from Argentina, Serbia, France. So it happens from time to time, and you just got to be ready no matter who you're playing.
Of course, I find that so crazy to think about that USA lost to Greece in 06. And I was only 6 years old when it happened, but I remember just from hearing it from every Greek coach that I've had ever about Big Sofo everyone knows him as Baby Shaq and how he kind of dominated those USA bigs and of course Spanulis' 3-point shooting. But there's so many things that went into that game to create that upset. But the biggest thing was, of course, the way the Greek team executed. And what I'm curious about, a lot of people have keyed in on Coach K's comments after the loss when he mentioned how he called a lot of their players by name, right? Number 4, number 7, and I believe number 13. And everyone was shocked as to how could he not know that preparation was obviously a major part in what led to the upset. How much have you seen that preparation change in terms of, obviously, from covering the team up close from back in the early 2000s to now, where there's such an attention to detail by the entire coaching staff and obviously the players as well, taking it incredibly seriously every single time?
Well, Coach K never made that mistake again. He called everybody by their names afterwards. The fact of the matter is they didn't know that Greek team very well. And like you mentioned, Big Sofo, that was Sophocles Shortsianicus. He had a tougher name to spell than Giannis Antetokounmpo. But they prepared, and in their film studies, I think the scout then was Rudy Tomjanovich, might have been Tony Ronzone. That's the way coaches prepare. When they're preparing to play a foreign team, they'll tell the players, look, we got to watch number 8, we got to watch number 14, we got to watch number 7. That's how you speak to a team, because a team is going to recognize a player by his uniform number, because they don't know these guys, but they will remember the number. That's the way you speak to a team, but that's not the way you speak to the media, because like you said, the media took that as like, wow, he doesn't even know their names. And like, how could he be so unprepared that he doesn't even know the names of these players? Coach K did know the names of the players. He just used coach speak in a press conference, not knowing that, hey, this is a bad idea. It's not going to go over well with the foreign press. And like you said, the reaction was predictable. People said, man, no wonder they lost. They don't know the players' names. No, they did know the players' names. That's the way coaches talk. Talk to any college coach and getting ready to prepare his team to play someone else. He's going to identify the opposing players by number because it's easier for his team to remember their numbers than their names. Or like maybe one guy's got red hair, or maybe one guy's got a crew cut. It's like, we got to watch crew cut, or we got to watch ponytail, or, So coaches will always come up with nicknames and not necessarily, name names at that kind of level. In the NBA, certainly that doesn't happen because everybody knows who everybody is. But when you're playing an opponent where name recognition is not as easy as number recognition or face recognition or some other identifying characteristic, that's how you'll get your team to listen and know who to watch out for. Al McGuire was the coach at Marquette long ago. He would never scout an opponent. He would go out there and watch them in the layup line prior to the game and figure out which guy they needed to stop. And that's how he would tell his Marquette Warrior teams, hey, we got to stop this guy. But that didn't come from watching film. That came from watching the layup line. That's kind of how intuitive Al was.
Obviously, when it comes to USA basketball, from thinking about how much it's changed over the last few years, I obviously like to transition to the crazy you're about to see with the 2020 Olympics that are obviously taking place in 2021. What do you see happening there? I've heard you talk about it on the Sheridan Show about NBA players maybe not being able to fully participate because of the playoffs going into the summer. What do you really see happening with the upcoming Olympics?
Well, there's a qualifying tournament in Victoria, Canada, that's going to take place right on the eve of the Olympics. There's still 4 spots up for grabs. Only 8 of the spots are filled. And because the NBA playoffs are going to be taking place at the same time as these qualifying tournaments, some teams are going to go into the qualifying tournament without their full roster. Serbia and Canada, for instance, are playing at the tournament in Victoria, British Columbia. Now, if Jamal Murray's still alive with the Denver Nuggets in the playoffs, Jamal's not going to be able to play for Canada in that tournament. Same with Nikola Jokic and the Nuggets. He's not going to be available to Serbia if the Nuggets are still alive in the NBA playoffs. So it's going to be a real day-to-day thing where if a foreign player's NBA team survives, he's going to miss the QT. But if the qualifying team gets out of the tournament, he'll go over to the Olympics. Fran Fraschilla was saying that on my last show that, look, if Jokic loses on a Friday night and is knocked out of the playoffs and Serbia is playing Saturday in Victoria, he's going to find a way to get from wherever he played his final game with the Nuggets to Victoria, and he'll be in a Serbia uniform the next day. So that'll be kind of interesting. And there's 4 of those qualifying tournaments taking place all around the world. Canada and Serbia have it kind of easy because all they have to do is get to British Columbia. There's another tournament in Croatia. I believe there's one in Greece as well. And so I don't remember where the 4th one is off the top of my head. But look, the field is going to fill out. The U.S. has already been grouped with there's 3 groups. They've changed the structure. It used to be 2 groups. There's 4 teams in each group. The U.S. gets France in its opener. France will have 10 NBA players on their team. And then Iran in their second game, the spread on that will be, 47. And then they're going to play one of the qualifying teams. I believe the team that comes out of Victoria is the U.S.'s third opponent. And the interesting thing about the Olympics is if the U.S. loses one of those games, it really doesn't matter because all you have to do is either win your group or be the best second place finisher. And that's based on point differential to get the 4th spot when it goes into single elimination. So, and they're only playing 6 games in the Olympics this year. Usually they play 8. So they've cut down the workload. So every game is going to be very important. But let's say, should the U.S. lose to France in that first game, you can pretty much expect that they're going to score as many points as possible against Iran in their second game to get the point differential thing on their side, because it'll behoove them to win by 115 points, because then they're going to lock up the point differential no matter what. So it's one of the idiosyncrasies of international basketball and FIBA rules that point differential really matters. That's why you'll see teams playing hard. It's a 21-point game, but teams are still going at each other like crazy because point differential matters. Jay Triano had a Team Canada squad that missed out. If they had scored 1 extra basket in one of their prelim games at the Olympics, they would have advanced. And they just lost out on like 1/100 of a percentage point on point differentials from moving on to the next stage. So international basketball is different in a lot of ways. That's one way. And then the physicality is crazy. It's like Popovich said, this is like armed combat compared to what they allow in the NBA, where there's no hand checking. In FIBA, there's wrestling and Greco-Roman wrestling, and it's really, really a different game in terms of what the referees will let them get away with, especially down low where the big guys are banging.
Awesome. Thinking about the different idiosyncrasies when it comes to the international game, thinking about things like point differential that we obviously never even think of here in any of our sports. And the first thing I thought of was how that could be kind of a solution to teams playing hard throughout the season, tanking, stuff like that. And obviously it's awesome thinking about how there's so many parts of the international game that we kind of don't really think about too much, but they could really change the way the game's played here.
Here's another one. And I haven't seen this happen for a long time, but it's happened. They play with a different kind of basketball. They play with a Molten. That one on the shelf behind me is a Spalding, and a Molten it's just the ball. The Molten is a different brand. Like, they'll give the team a whole bunch of balls to break in and use in practice. So that, obviously when you take a ball out of a box and inflate it and use it, it's kind of slippery. And you got to break it in, and once it's broken in, it kind of, you can hold it and grip it with your hands all that much better. But what's happened with Team USA games in the past is all of a sudden the game ball comes out and it's right out of the box, and it's overinflated and it's slippery, and all of a sudden it's slipping out of players' hands, and turnovers are happening like crazy, and they can't grip the ball, and you're like, why are they so sloppy? And they're so sloppy because they're playing with a brand new rock hard slippery basketball, and that happens from time to time. In tournaments all over the world. It's not just the Olympics or the World Cup. They have under 18s, under 16s, under 15s, tournaments that USA Basketball competes in all over the world. And that's one of the tricks that they use against the Americans is, let's give them a brand new rock hard slippery basketball. Just funny stuff happens in FIBA. Look at the 1972 gold medal game in Munich. If you ever want to know what kind of crazy stuff happens in FIBA, that one went to the jury. Yes, they have a jury in international basketball for disputes. And the jury ruled in favor of the United States against the Soviet Union. And the head of FIBA came down from the stands and overruled the jury. And that's why they played the final couple seconds of that game 3 times. You got to look that one up, you're younger people, but the 1972 Team USA included Doug Collins, Mike Bantam. They didn't accept their silver medals, and to this day, those silver medals are sitting in a vault in I believe it's in Geneva, Switzerland. It might be in Zurich, Switzerland, untouched. And guys have put it in their will. My heirs are not allowed to get that silver medal out of the vault in Geneva. It's going to stay there for all eternity.
Well, I heard about that the whole end of the game, but I never heard of the passion they all have for never accepting those medals and leaving them in that vault in Geneva. That's incredible.
Yeah, there's all sorts of great stories that go along with international basketball, and I had a guy. I wrote a column recently for Basketball News. I talked to Spencer Haywood, who recovered from COVID, and spoke very strongly about not stigmatizing COVID survivors, because that's something that we're dealing with in this pandemic, is that people who have had it, immune to it for a little while, become stigmatized. And Spencer spoke very strongly about, welcoming those people back into the community, and making them not feel like they're, like they had the Black Plague or something like that. But Spencer told some great stories about the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, and how he went there, and he was, I believe he was 19 at the time, and he had never been outside of Detroit. He had no idea what he was up against, and he goes into Mexico City and can't speak the language, but he was the best player on that team, and scouts who were at that game saw him and were like, wow, this kid is going to be a Hall of Famer and the next great NBA player. But he was too young to be drafted. And he actually sued the NBA, and it went all the way to the Supreme Court. It's a famous case called Haywood v. NBA, and he won. And no longer did you have to be a 4-year college senior to be drafted into the NBA, because a lot of guys, who weren't ready for the NBA, they would go into the ABA until they were 4 years out of high school, and then they'd jump over to the NBA. And Spencer started his pro career in the ABA. But that case was the precedent for what later became high school players going directly to the pros, which we saw with Kobe and with LeBron, which then morphed into the one and done rule because David Stern wasn't real comfortable with his scouts being in high school gyms. So now we have the one and done rule, and that's why we got a good G League Ignite team to watch now. But I think that's going to circle back, and by the time Bronny James comes out of high school in California, they're going to start letting high school players back into the NBA, and whichever team drafts LeBron James Jr. is going to be the team that signs LeBron James when his contract with the Lakers is up.
Definitely, that I can't wait to see all those things take place. And G League Ignite's been fantastic over the last few days, and down there in the G League bubble. I'm curious, taking things over to the NBA, what you've kind of really hopeful for this season, and what your maybe your biggest takes are from just this last month of NBA basketball.
Well, number one, the Utah Jazz are damn good, and they're not getting the respect that they probably deserve. I've been watching them closely. They shoot the three. They got so many different guys that can shoot the 3-pointer. They're over 40%. They took apart the Bucks the other night. Watch out for that team. They won again without Conley last night, and it'll be interesting. They play 2 next weekend against the Clippers. It's a back-to-back, and they're both in LA. When you win 18 out of 19 games, which is I think their number, you're playing fantastic basketball. They're almost like the Bucks were last season, except they got a little bit of a slow start. That's one thing. The other thing that's really striking is the lack of fans. Last year, when the season came back on in the bubble, every game looked the same. They had the virtual fans, the thing they built in partnership with Microsoft, and all the games meant something. When the bubble restarted the season, everybody had 8 games, and they all meant something. And then after that were playoff games, and those all meant something. So the basketball was much more competitive. Now we're seeing empty arena after empty arena after empty arena, and we're seeing teams kind of go through the motions, and there's not a lot of defense being played. And look, with the rules changes in the NBA with no hand checking, it's very, very hard to play defense as it is. But some of the scores have been tremendously high, and on any given night, you could probably pick out half the games where the players just didn't really seem to be into it. And look, that happens every January and February and March. Regular season basketball doesn't look like playoff basketball. Playoff basketball, there's something at stake, and guys play a lot harder. But the optics of seeing one empty arena after another is really startling. And it kind of makes you wonder, where does this end, and what does it look like? What does the finish line look like, where we can go back to normal and have Jack Nicholson and sitting courtside and Spike Lee sitting courtside? I don't know that we're going to see that this season, but hopefully we see it again next season, because this pandemic just endures and endures and endures. We're at 11 and a half months now. Because there's no clearly defined finish line, I just don't know when normal returns. So that's probably number 2. And then number 3 is, damn, LeBron James just doesn't get old. He's the only person in human history who refuses to age. And he keeps putting up triple doubles. He keeps making the big plays at the end of games. A couple nights ago, it was just a steal. And, that team's fun to watch. They play a lot of overtime games, but he is continuing to make clutch play after clutch play, and he had that thing with that Kathy in Atlanta, and that road trip, went pretty well for them. So I'm looking forward to seeing the Lakers play the Clippers and the Lakers play the Jazz, because those 3 teams are certainly the class of the West right now. And Western Conference basketball is again better than Eastern Conference basketball right now. Although Brooklyn had Kevin Durant back last night and looked a lot different. And it's interesting what Kyrie said afterwards is that Kyrie's going to let James Harden be the point guard, and Kyrie's going to be the shooting guard. So, they're really all in on offense, and I think they still need another big to replace Jared Allen. But those guys, there will become somebody will become available to Sean Marks to get in one way or another, whether it's via trade. You can get a guy like maybe Hassan Whiteside, who's not being used by the Sacramento Kings, or you can wait to see who comes out of China after the Chinese season is over. because there are a bunch of Americans who are playing over there, and there may be a guy who pops out in the G League that becomes a usable big for them. But I think Brooklyn is just one backup center away from being the class of the East. So really, those are, to answer your questions. Those are the big things. I want to see a little more of the Miami Heat because they've been the most perplexing team in the East. They haven't really had their whole team together a lot. And we're talking about the team that went to the NBA Finals last year, and for them to be sitting at the bottom of the Eastern Conference is weird. Sort of the same in the West with the Dallas Mavericks, although over the past week they've started to turn things around, and Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis are starting to play better together. But they're also the worst three-point shooting team in the league, and you wouldn't expect that with those two bigs and Tim Hardaway, but that's what the numbers are. And I think if Dallas can start hitting their threes, they can climb out of that hole and make it to top 10. And again, this year there's 20 teams in the playoffs for all intents and purposes. Usually there's 16, and a lot of coaches are unhappy with that. They feel it disincentivizes the regular season. But I think when we get to that point, and and teams 7 through 10 in each conference are playing those playing games, it's going to be riveting basketball and fun to watch. But the price we pay is bad January and February basketball a lot of times.
Definitely a hefty price to pay in terms of seeing bad basketball at any time, because obviously we all love seeing it being super competitive, and it's unfortunate to hear about how obviously that's the reality that we're, especially with under the current circumstances. Sometimes I'm curious though. You've obviously spoken highly about a bunch of teams. We're about at the halfway mark with this year's shortened season. Who do you see making to the finals this year? Is it Brooklyn versus Utah? What do you see there?
It's just too soon to say. Last year at this point in the season, I was touting Miami. And it wasn't this point; it was in March, because I was doing an interview with a Japanese media outlet, and I said, "Hey, man, Miami beat Milwaukee. Miami can handle Milwaukee. They're the only team, so watch out for Miami." And I think my pick in March was Miami and the Clippers. This year, because you're not seeing everybody's best on any given night, and there's been so many contact tracing and COVID factors that have kept certain players off the floor at certain times. You haven't seen a lot of teams stay whole for the whole season. Now Utah is one team that has, but the Lakers, when Davis is healthy, because he's been out the last couple of games, but the Lakers, when Anthony Davis is healthy, they're better than they were last year. With Dennis Schroeder on that team and Montrezl Harrell, that's a better team personnel wise than the team that won the championship last year. So I would say this. I think we'll probably, if gun to my head, we'd see Utah at LA in the Western Conference Finals. In the East, right now I'd probably say you're looking at Brooklyn and Milwaukee, but Philadelphia, even though they lost to the Suns last night, when Joel Embiid is on, people are talking about him for MVP because he's having that kind of a season. His conditioning is much better. Is his head screwed on straight? That's always the big question with him and Ben. And can Doc motivate those two guys to play smart and to run inbounds plays properly at the end of tight games? I don't count out Boston. I think they miss Marcus Smart a lot more than people realize. I think Danny Ainge is overdue for a trade. Jason Tatum's having a fantastic year. Jaylen Brown is better than he was last year, and Kemba Walker is still kind of coming back from his injury, and he hasn't come anywhere close to hitting his stride. So the Boston Celtics that we're seeing in February, not probably the same thing that we're going to be seeing out of the Boston Celtics in April. So a lot of times it's who's playing real well in April, not who's playing real well in January or February, that determines who you want to pick going into the playoffs. Right now, it's fun to look ahead and to make that prediction, but it's kind of a half blind prediction because teams have not yet hit their stride, and they're not really locked in yet. They're I don't want to say they're all going through the motions, because they're not, but there are a lot of teams that are going through the motions that have more inside of them that than what they're showing. And As we get closer to the end of the season, you'll start to see more them take things more seriously and play with better chemistry and cohesion and pay more mind to defense. So we'll see. But there could be a sneaky good team out there that no one's pinpointing right now. That like a month ago you would have said Utah is sneaky good, but now everybody knows about Utah. Who's that team right now? I really couldn't say, but the Knicks are a candidate, but not to like make noise, but to get into the playoffs as a top eight. I think New York can do that, depending on how they handle the Mitchell Robinson injury. But those guys are playing hard for Tibbs, and Tibbs is a heck of a motivator and a great judge of talent. It's interesting that New York Knicks fans have something to cheer about, even though they can't go to the games and cheer.
In my short existence on this planet, or being a Knicks fan, it's obviously huge seeing that from the New York Knicks. But even just thinking about everything you said, and it's exciting to me thinking about how we obviously haven't seen the best out of any of these teams yet. And there's so much talent, whether it's exciting duos, obviously the trio in Brooklyn, but for the most part, we have duos, small, big duos, wing duos, like with the Celtics. There's so much talent everywhere. I feel like there's a lot more players this year that are having breakout seasons than there are that are having really real slumps as compared to last year. So obviously, really exciting stuff there. Obviously, as we reach the midpoint of the season, in February right now, in the weeks that we're in, we'd normally be having an all-star game, and there's a lot of pushback throughout the league about having one. What's your take on that, and what have you been hearing? Because from the outside looking in, as a fan seeing this on Twitter, it seems that with all these high-profile players speaking out, it really looks like something that won't happen, and that obviously, of course, shouldn't happen.
Well, Turner Sports pays the NBA a lot of money, and Turner wants an all-star game, and I think Turner's going to get the All-Star game. They're already, putting everything in place as far as plans. Players are going to come in on Saturday and they're going to get out of there on Sunday. So it's going to be real tight. It's not going to be an All-Star weekend where the guys are in town for 4 days. It's going to be a quick in out. And I think what the players are upset about is they were told they were going to have a week off, especially a guy like, the guys on the Lakers or the guys on the Heat. Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, those are the all-stars on those teams. Those guys went deep. They spent a ton of time in the bubble, and they had the shortest off-season turnaround in pro sports history. And so they were kind of really looking forward to having a week off to recharge. And they were told they were going to get a week off to recharge. And then, like a lot of things in this country, the plans change and the rules changed. And, we see that every day now. There's new rules, new plans, just to adapt to what's going on, concerning the pandemic. Well, now it looks like there's going to be an all-star game, and there's going to be a dunk contest at halftime. And guys that were looking forward to having a week off are mandated to go. It's in their contracts. If they're chosen, they have to go. So they're not happy about it, but they also realize where their bread is buttered. And so they will go, and we will have a game. What it's going to look like where they're going to play it. Are there going to be actual people in the stands, or is it going to be, another virtual crowd? Some of those details still have to be worked out. But look, the All-Star game is generally a lot of fun, but a lot of the fun is produced by what's going on outside of the game. Who's in town, and what's the vibe in that city, and what's the buzz going around, and what sort of trade talk is going on, because usually all the general managers are there, and it's right ahead of the trade deadline, although they switched that last year because of the trade talk was sort of knocking the game off the news. But over NBA history, All-Star Weekend is a time when the whole league, or the best of the league, and all the league's power brokers came together. The commissioner gave a press conference, and he just put the NBA on the radar for a lot of people, especially for a lot of people who don't follow it on a day-to-day basis. And the NBA has some casual fans to win back. There was a certain segment of the population that was turned off by the way that the NBA came back in the bubble last year. And so if you have an All-Star game, it gives people something to watch. And with people watching as much TV as they're watching now, this will be something casual fans may just tune into, because you know that the best 24 players in the NBA are going to be out there. Generally, it's a pretty good fourth quarter, as long as the first three quarters are not competitive, but the fourth quarter of an All-Star game usually is. So I don't know. It remains to be seen if it's going to be good or not. And the blowback from the players, I think, is natural. When you're told you're going to get a week off and then your vacation plans are altered, there's gonna be some blowback. But these guys get paid a lot of money to play professional basketball, and they will have time off over the summer. And until then, they have to make uncomfortable adjustments in their lives, just like everybody has to make uncomfortable adjustments in their lives as we all go through something that's kind of unprecedented in human history, at least over the last 100 years.
Obviously, everyone wants to see an All-Star game, but we definitely understand. And as a fan, seeing guys like LeBron and Kawhi and Giannis come out, I thought to myself, oh, there's no way it's going to happen. But it's interesting seeing, obviously, your inside look on the league as to how, well, in their contract, they kind of have to. And this is how the money works with Turner and how all that plays out. So that's incredible insight, and obviously opens up my mind to, it's not all about like player empowerment's really grown over the past few years, but there's still a lot of things that the league sort of dictates. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out over the next few days or weeks.
Yeah, everybody can moan and groan in the days leading up to it, but I think once everybody's there and is in place, they'll put on a good show. And they may not be happy about it going in, but once they're there and the bags are unpacked and they're around the best of the best, we'll get a good game. And everybody doesn't have to be happy with everything every day, but everybody's got to do their jobs as best as they can, and that extends to NBA players as much as it does to the guy working at the 7-Eleven. You got to do a good job, and it makes you feel good about yourself, and it makes others around you fulfilled. So we'll get an All-Star game, and until then we'll get a lot of gab and a lot of complaining, but we'll get an All-Star game, and then we'll have a second half of the season in which playoff seedings are going to be at stake, and the quality of the basketball naturally gets better. We see it year after year.
Can't wait to see all that happen, whether it's the All-Star game, second half of the season, the play-in tournaments that we're having this year with 8, 9, and 10. There's no better time of the year than what will be the next few months. So can you please kind of just transitioning away from all the stuff with the NBA, which has been so fascinating. I'm curious about, can you kind of tell our listeners what you're doing now with, whether it's basketballnews.com, the Sheridan Show? I'm curious as to, obviously, I want to make sure our listeners know where they could find you and catch up with what you're doing.
Yeah, well, check out basketballnews.com. It's a news site. We've only been open. This is our first year. It's owned by a guy named Chad Horseman, who's out of Phoenix, and it's managed by Alex Kennedy, who a lot of NBA fans know. He's got 150,000 followers on Twitter. He's been covering the NBA since he was 11 years old. And Alex is a great guy, and we got a lot of ex-players on our staff. Tom Thomas, one of the most outspoken and well-spoken guys you'll ever meet, is on out of Washington. James Posey, you remember, is a great three-point shooter, does the Pose cast. Vinny Del Negro, who coached the Bulls and coached the Clippers, he writes columns for us, and we keep bringing on more and more talent all the time. Chad wants Basketball News to be a place where readers and listeners and viewers can hear the opinions of not only journalists but ex-players. And John, it's funny. One thing I've learned over the years is that ex-players are some of the best reporters ever, because they're all talking about stuff that's going on, and they know stuff that like regular people don't know, because they're all they do is talk basketball with their colleagues and their ex-colleagues. And so now there's an outlet that's pulling on ex-players and leaning on ex-players, and you listen to some of the podcasts on basketballnews.com and you're like, man, I never knew that. And that's really cool. And if you join us for one of our watch parties and you're watching a game live, you can turn down the sound on the TV and just hear what the former players and anybody, whoever else is jumping on any different watch party, is saying about a game. And it's really, we're bringing something to the table that nobody else has done. And if you want to distinguish yourself as a website, you have to do something that nobody else is doing. And that's what we're trying to do at basketballnews.com. And I'm proud to be a part of it, because I've been covering the NBA for I've been in sports 32 years, and I've been covering the NBA more years than I can choose to count. To be involved in something as new and different as basketballnews.com is really, really exhilarating. And it's, I'm proud to be a part of it, and it's my new home. And hopefully we're going to be the go-to destination for hoops fans, that some of these other websites that have been around for a long time and have gotten kind of static, there'll be a nice alternative, for the diehards.
Love it. I for sure took a deep dive into it before jumping on with you, but I can't wait to see it grow over the next few months, years, and obviously keeping up with it and seeing that for myself. So really excited for that. And Chris, thank you so much for coming on. This was absolutely fantastic in terms of all the inside scoop that I kind of learned from you about some of the international stuff, the NBA stuff. This conversation went everywhere in basketball, and I really loved every minute of it. So thank you.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on, John, and good luck to you in your career. You're killing it already at a young age, so keep it up.
Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.